Hey everyone, Nate John here, producer for the show. Stay tuned till the end of the show. When Scott, Sara, and Andy are done talking about the news of the week, I'll be heading to a really cool museum exhibit as it's being put up. And it's not really a normal exhibit. There's no paintings and no sculptures, but instead there's jewelry and kitchenware and one really cool beer-themed piece of work. That's coming up at the end, so enjoy the show.
Thanks for joining us on the Voice of San Diego podcast in partnership with News Radio 600 Kogo. I am Scott Lewis, the editor-in-chief at Voice. I'm joined by Andrew Keatts. He's the assistant news editor.
That's right.
Sort of.
Right. Yeah, that's right, actually.
It's Sara, Libby, our managing editor.
Hello.
Hello. We talked last week about Mark Kersey leaving the Republican Party. He's a city council member. That day after, I got some reaction from some of the Republicans that want to succeed him. They want to take his seat. Joe Leventhal, a Republican running to replace Kersey, said he thinks Kersey's perspective on policy he's still a Republican. I'm disappointed he believes he can be more effective outside the party rather than within, but I agree with his disdain for partisanship. Really just kind of goes along with him.
What's the, it's like the opposite of a rhino, right? So
It's
what's
like,
the,
no,
he is a
yeah,
Republican.
yeah.
He's just not in name.
Yeah.
A Nairo.
Republican,
not a rhino in name.
Yeah.
But Pat Batten, the other Republican running to replace Kersey, was less charitable. Much less charitable. He said, I'm disappointed in the decision by politicians to change their party preference for political expediency. As a Marine, it's not in my DNA to retreat when the challenge is too daunting. In fact, it's time to double down and fight for our values. So he
took a shot of whiskey, shot his gun in the air.
We're going to have to come up with a tally for him, I feel of ways he can work being a Marine into
like the
seemingly
Sherman,
unrelated questions.
Yeah.
like the Sherman counter.
Well,
Yeah.
he got
not being a politician.
Got it, Kersey there. So the only part I really dispute there is political expediency. I don't know what Kersey's going for, as we talked about, and I don't know how this helps him if it did.
Yeah, maybe I could be proven wrong, but I still don't see how this helps him.
So
Maybe it does, but I don't see it.
We'll check that out. We did hear that Kersey is still considering the county or the mayor's race. He says he's still hearing from people who may want him to do that, and he's still interested. So we'll see if he does that. Again, don't know if it helps to be an independent or not. All right, coming up today, a company is quietly buying up land in Imperial Valley, and we have all kinds of theories about why. And the biggest race in the county has finally been set, the biggest political race. Control of the county board of supervisors is at stake. We have some outtakes from your interview with Kristen Gaspar, who's decided to run for re-election as a Republican in District 3 of the county, and why that's such a big deal. And this week, the San Diego City Council President Georgette Gomez floated a proposal for inclusionary housing rules and fees and such. And we talked with Vivian Moreno, City Councilwoman, about that. And she came into the studio and talked about a few other things. You guys talked to her, right? All right, so to handle this first issue, I have brought in Rivard. Ry, hello.
Hey, what's up?
So the Imperial Valley has fewer than 200,000 people, correct?
It does.
But the farmers there have as much right to the Colorado River water as Arizona and Nevada combined?
Correct, yes.
So 200,000 people have more right to the water that flows down the Colorado River than two big states.
Yeah, I mean, they're farmers out there, so it's even fewer than 200,000. It's the people that own the land that use the water. They irrigate about 500,000 acres of farmland.
So did they get that because they were the first to tap into it or something?
Yeah, they were back there, way back there, tapping into the Colorado River.
Like, that water is going to be gold. Let's get into it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a desert out there. And
a hot desert.
They diverted part of the Colorado, and, sometimes it didn't go so well. The Colorado breached the diversion and created the Salton Sea by flooding low-lying area.
So now one company, Renewable Resource Group, has quietly bought up 16,000 acres of land in the Imperial County. Now across the state, Renewable has paid farmers to stop farming and sell water instead to urban agencies. And so we don't know if that's what they're doing here, but we don't not know that.
So actually, they haven't paid farmers to stop farming. They've bought land in valuable areas. They bought a bunch of land in Blythe, which is this little town in far east Riverside County, right on the Arizona-California border. They're on the California side. And they bought a bunch of land out there a couple of years ago in conjunction with Harvard University's nonprofit investment arm. And their investment arm. And their theory being that if they fallowed the water, or if they fallowed the land, they could do something with the unused water. And their theory was finding a way to transfer that water to the Central Valley, which is another big farming area that is having some water issues because of regulations, because of drought, and because there's a bunch of water that they were relying on under the ground that they've been pumping up so quickly that it won't refill. So they're running out of essentially cheap and easy water.
So it's not that they paid the farmers to not farm. It's that they bought the land.
They bought the
land.
land.
They didn't farm it.
That was their business idea. But to do that, they needed the cooperation of the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, which is the only agency really in California that could facilitate that kind of transfer, because they'd be moving water legally, not physically, from the Colorado River to Northern California. And Metropolitan is the only agency that has a water system into both the Colorado River and Northern California.
Okay, so why is this an interesting story?
Well, it's a lot of people have talked for years about how water is going to be the next oil. It's going to become a commodity if it isn't already. Mm-hmm. And this company is really been flying under the radar in making water into a commodity, or land that comes with water into a commodity. There are other people that have done it. One of the co-founders of this company used to work for a company called Exurix, which was a subsidiary of Enron. And back when Enron had these theories about how you can, trade energy, they also had some theories about how you could trade water. And so this company sort of has its roots in that idea, which is happening a lot all over the West. There's environmental groups that think that the best way to get water for cities is to pay farmers to stop farming. The Walton Family Foundation is doing something similar, but those are both generally nonprofits. This is a company that's trying to profit from moving water around the West in different and new ways.
I mean, they looked at this complex system of water rights, mm-hmm. where it's like seniority-based water rights primarily, and said, oh, there are unique ways that we can arbitrage this system.
Yeah, I mean, so you have farmers, one of the things that's happening in agriculture is farms are being consolidated, but also, the younger generations are sometimes not interested in farming. So they have this water, but they don't really want to farm with it, but they could make a whole bunch of money transferring the water off their land to a large agricultural entity that wants to farm, or to a city that needs water.
Now, so there's one deal that they make that you go through in your story that was really revealing to me. You can maybe explain it here, where you said that on the surface it looks like they're borrowing $1 from one guy and paying to another guy. Mm-hmm. But actually they found a way in looking at the complex water rights system to essentially create value from thin air.
Yeah, so the water coming from the Colorado River is generally fairly low cost. In Imperial, they pay like $20.
Like relative to like Sierra water.
Yeah,
right?
for a huge unit of water, whereas in the Central Valley, they're paying at times hundreds of dollars for water. And during droughts, to finish a crop, an almond farmer would pay thousands of dollars for a unit of water. So if you can transfer legally, generally, cheap water to where people are willing to pay a lot for water, you can make a lot of money. Without generating any real additionally new water. You're just moving it around legally.
And so how did they do that?
Well, they didn't end up doing that. Matt said, we're not gonna do this deal for you. Mm-hmm. And so they still had land, and they went to the Metropolitan Water District and said, hey, we'll sell you this land. and Metropolitan bought it for, it looks like, about twice what this company, along with Harvard, paid for it. They bought it from the Mormon Church back about a decade ago.
Yeah, so that's the other part of this is like, even when their water schemes aren't working out, they're just selling the land that they've purchased at huge premiums to these public agencies, and the value in the land is the water.
Yeah, because Metropolitan can take advantage of a less complicated form of the deal that this company was trying to pull off. Metropolitan can fallow the land, and through this priority system, any water that isn't used by a senior water rights holder, like the farmers out near Blythe, automatically gets passed down to the junior rights holder in the state of California. That's the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. So anything that isn't used in the Palo Verde Valley where Blythe is, or in the Imperial Valley, in theory and through law, ends up belonging to the Metropolitan Water District and basically urban cities in Southern California.
This could be affecting our water bills.
Yeah, so we focused on the Blythe deal, the land deal, and then we also focused on another deal where this company was basically acting as a broker for a Swiss insurance company that had 20,000 acres of land in the Central Valley in a key area where Governor Brown wanted to build a pair of water tunnels. There's still talk of building one tunnel instead of two, and it would go through the same general area. This company came to Metropolitan. They had different theories for how they could make money off the land. They were going to turn it into reservoirs, or there was going to be an energy project there. Or at one point in time, they were talking about carbon capture, something that Senator Barbara Boxer's son was working on with this company. But they eventually decided to sell the land to Metropolitan, or Metropolitan agreed to buy it, sort of as a way to preserve the land for when they needed it to build the tunnels, which now it's not clear that the tunnels are going to get built anytime soon. And there was a lot of consternation in Northern California that the Southern California Water Agency was stealing their water. And then there was a lot of consternation in Southern California that Metropolitan didn't have an appraisal for this land, and that we uncovered that there was an appraisal, not that maybe Metropolitan had paid for, but that showed that the land was worth about half what Metropolitan ended up paying, which was $175 million.
Right, Rivard, thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
We didn't get a chance last week to talk about some news we were waiting for. Kristen Gaspar, the county supervisor representing the district that stretches from Del Mar and Encinitas to Escondido, has decided to run for re-election, and she will not pursue another bid for Congress. Okay, you two did an interview with Gaspar. I thought it was great. You can find it, of course, if you were listening to this on your feed, the Voice of San Diego podcast feed. One of the best feeds of local politics.
Don't say feed again. You said it too many times.
I was particularly excited to hear her reason for why she did want to run for Congress. Here's that clip.
I love my job. I love my community. I grew up here. My roots are here. My family's business is here. My family's here. But it was really challenging the early days on the Board of Supervisors, recognizing that we're a pass-through agency for state and federal programs and their dollars. And some of the decision-making out of Sacramento and D.C. can't be classified as good decision-making, and it has a real local impact.
Okay, so this was the first time I've heard a county supervisor articulate something that I've talked about for a long time, which is that the county, a lot of people are like, why doesn't the county ever get as much attention as it deserves? It's a giant agency and very important, blah, blah, blah. Well, part of it is because so many of its decisions are made far away. It literally does pass through everything from health and human services to, food assistance programs, all these kinds of things. And what she's saying there is, I got to the county and I was like, oh, we don't actually do things here.
We don't make decisions here.
I want to go somewhere where they make decisions. Now, truthfully, she's probably just said, well, Congress should be, fun and it's open and I can do it. But really, that is an interesting point, right? Like, she's basically saying something we've tried to articulate for a while, which is, that's part of the reason the county hasn't gotten a lot of attention, is because it, big 50 to 80% of what it does is not done there.
I mean, to what extent, though, do you think that that has started to ring hollow in the last 4 months when we've seen a living example of what the county can do if it simply decides it wants to.
Well, yeah, and so that's what you asked her.
Yeah.
And I think she's like, yeah, it's gotten really interesting.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the point is, yes, but I would still argue some of those things are, still kind of peripheral for what like this giant agency, were it to mobilize some of its funding, could really do. Not to minimize, shelter for asylum seekers, suing the federal government, stuff like that. But its fundamentals are still as a pass through.
Right.
So, So, what did you guys think of your interview with her?
I thought she was a little hard to pin down on some of the things that she's actually been the most outspoken about. Some of the border and immigration and law enforcement agencies that she's been very willing to talk about on Fox News and was less willing to be specific.
Did you get the sense that she's pulled back on some of that since she's going for a local office, more hostile to the Trump point of view and stuff like that? Or, as if she was going for Congress, she might try to really wrap up that sort of Make America Great flank?
I did get that sense. I think she seemed very fired up about some of the Sandag issues and was really eager to talk about why she thought that was important, and kind of less eager to talk about some of the border stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, there was it seems like a carefully messaged idea that she said, I realize that President Trump isn't popular, which is just a statement of fact.
Mm-hmm.
It is not necessarily her distancing from him. It's just saying, I know that the people of San Diego don't like him.
Yeah, it's kind of a clever way to acknowledge that people don't like him without actually saying that she doesn't like him.
Right.
Yeah, it was. I thought she'd obviously spent some time thinking about how to handle this issue, and she's like, if I reframe it as, yes, I know that was a bad political decision, but I still did it anyway. She can maybe try to change it into a courageous
Act of
effort.
bravery.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Okay, well, you mentioned this local discussion. I thought, again, you had some really great interactions on the border wall and immigration issues and law enforcement issues. But one of the points where she really stood out, and your exchange really stood out, is this issue about highways versus transit, which she's really trying to stake out as a major potential cleave in this race. And, this argument that we've been following for a while, that the half-cent sales tax that was passed or extended in 2004 and all the promises that went with it for highways and such, that could be a big issue. And she does nod, though, in this discussion that it is more than just a debate about transit versus highways. I think some of the conservatives in the county might just want to have that discussion. Like, can you believe they want to waste all this money on a train? And she also acknowledges there's a problem. They might not have the money that they need.
They do not have the money,
right?
To be clear.
So let's listen to that.
Do I think that all 14 highway projects that have been ignored, that were voted on as part of that Transnet tax, specifically spelled out to the voters, should be included in this new plan? I'm realistic. That's not going to happen. But there are projects that we have been promising to our community for a lot longer than the Transnet tax, decades, that have been kicked down the road.
So she's kind of trying to find another, like a middle ground there, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think clearly Republicans in this county they see this as a winning issue for them. Local radio talk show host had a press conference today about his plan to run a campaign against anybody that votes in favor of this attempt to amend Transnet. That seems to be an extension of that same talk show host's failed gas tax repeal initiative from last year. But nonetheless, like, whether it is or isn't successful, they think it's going to be successful. I think, Chris and Gaspar's consultant, Jason Rowe, told me specifically that he thinks that this is going to be a local issue that gets voters' attention in 2020.
Yeah, so there are 3 Democrats running for this seat against her now. Escondido City Councilwoman Olga Diaz, a former person in the Obama administration, Tara Lawson-Remer, and a firefighter, Jeff Griffith. So they're all fired up. Now, I think asking them about some of these topics is going to be really interesting. Like, a lot of them are in North County cities that are worried about their highways and congestion issues. So that'll be something to talk about. Hopefully we'll have all three of them come in and spend some time with us on those same issues, because this is the race. This is the race. This will probably be the marquee race for the county. You purchased it in our draft.
Yeah, I just want to remind everybody of that.
I saw
it's like looking like a good pick for old Sara.
It was a good investment. Yes, but yes, the Democrats, they acted excited that Gaspar was running again because they think they can really hammer her on this association with Trump. I mean, she did embrace Trump more than probably any other than Duncan Hunter, any Republican elected leader in the county, really. Duncan Hunter, Joel Anderson.
Certainly over anybody with profile. There might be some
high
folks
profile
forgetting about, yeah.
Right. And so, but on the other hand, who knows how these things can turn. And so it's going to be the marquee race of the year, and it's finally set, it looks like. And so we're going to talk about a few more of those races that are coming up. And we're going to talk to Vivian Moreno. Thanks for listening to the Voice of San Diego podcast on News Radio 600 Kogo. You can listen to the full podcast on any podcast app, any feed out there. On the second half of the show, we'll go over some more of these election insights and an interview with Councilwoman Vivian Moreno.
So what are we staring at?
So we're looking at one of my favorite pieces in the whole Mingay collection because it's just so wacky. But it is a chair made of braised Budweiser beer cans.
Cool, right? Stick around to hear why this thing exists and what it's doing in an international museum exhibit. That's coming up in a bit.
We are back. Okay, there's very few incumbents running. We just talked about Kristen Gaspar. She's running for her re-election. We weren't sure she was going to, but now she is. And that's the only major incumbent running for re-election in these seats that we're following closely. And that includes, for example, mayor. The mayor is out. He's marching towards lame duck status. I don't know when that actually hits. Probably when there's. I've decided that lame duck usually means that somebody is already ready or anointed to be your successor, and that period is lame duck.
Yeah, that's my understanding of what a lame duck is.
Is that fair?
You guys seem to have won this argument against me, so it's no reason for me to claim otherwise.
Thank you. It means a lot.
Uh-huh.
I think the mayoral race is a little different than some of the other races in which there are no incumbents, only because both of the main candidates, Gloria and Bree, have like established public service records that they can kind of use against each other, whereas some of the other races feature a lot of newcomers who really don't have a record that they can either stand on or that their opponent can attack.
Well, that came up this week. So San Diego City Attorney Mara Elliott, who's an incumbent running unopposed, should be clear so far, she endorsed Assemblyman Todd Gloria for the race for mayor. It's probably the most high-profile endorsement to date. We had a chance to talk to Monica Montgomery. She was...
Is that true? Is it?
No, he rolled out all those state legislators.
But I think like city counts a little bit more.
Is
there
maybe Lorena Gonzalez would quibble with that.
That's fair. Good point. Like Lorena Gonzalez endorsing Todd Gloria is probably a bigger deal. But I do think
also like doing them all at once. In volume, they end up taking a greater significance.
I mean,
I don't know. It's fine. I'm not mostly trying to argue. I was just kind of surprised.
Definitely nailing down Lorena Gonzalez, Shirley Weber, and Tony Atkins for your mayoral endorsement is huge. Definitely. Okay. I guess I just mean city hall wise. Yeah. We've been waiting to see how the city council breaks on this issue. And again, we talked to Monica Montgomery. She wasn't willing to say yet who she supports. And so now we have Mara Elliott, who, she was talked about as having like some pretty significant political capital when she first got in there. Like maybe she could run for mayor, maybe she could move on. It seems like that's diminished a little bit, as it does for all city attorneys, because they decide to do things while they're city attorney that are hard and weird and frustrating for people like me sometimes.
Yeah, you have a actual rivalry with the office of city attorney,
I do.
not like any individual
any one
person.
person.
I've been in a fight with every one of them so far, and I guess I'm going to continue. But then Barbara Bree hit. You mentioned using records against them. Barbara Bree hit Todd Gloria and Mara Elliott for this, saying they have less respect for public transparency and accountability than she does, and so it wasn't any surprise that they support each other. And she mentioned that issue we followed for so long, her Mara Elliott's support and sponsorship of a bill that would have basically gutted the Public Records Act in California, made it much harder to enforce, and it became an issue.
Yeah, it's not very often that you see somebody use an endorsement against your opponent. Usually they just don't respond at all.
Yeah.
And this was interesting to be like,
She
actually,
weaponized.
she sucks.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Which makes it a little awkward sitting in the closed sessions, I bet, but whatever.
She also kind of hit Gloria on that issue of trying to purge city emails when he was interim mayor, which I thought was maybe a little unfair because he's kind of reversed his position on that and said he's learned from that and is now proposing a state bill that would require agencies to hang on to their emails for 2 years.
Yeah, so you could still hang on to them longer, but at least we would clarify for the hundreds maybe of local governments that purge their emails after just 30, 90, 180 days. So hopefully that gets at least some standard about the clarity about what is required for those records. So yes, we have up and down the ticket from the 4 city council races to the 3 county supervisor races. We are looking at the fact that all the county supervisors will be different in 3 years.
Yeah, I mean, so Kristen Gaspar is a holdover.
Oh, that's right. Yeah,
But this will be the end of the era of the county supervisors when it was the same 5 people for 25 years.
yeah,
Right? That era will be over.
it's over. Wow.
Yeah.
South Bay race, the District 3 is going to be huge. Nora Vargas, Ben Hueso, what was the
Rafael
Castellanos. He just got some endorsements too. A lot's going on, and we're still waiting to hear, I think, definitively about whether David Alvarez is running or not. Right?
Yeah, I think
Sounds like
not,
he's out.
but yeah.
And then the District 2 race, the East County, Tom Lemon, labor leader. And then we've got Steve Voss and his Republican rival, Joel Anderson. So a lot of big, interesting countywide races. And then the city council, like you said, a bunch of new faces. District 3, Tony Duran running.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so to me, what is interesting is it's a complete turnover in regional leadership.
Yeah.
Without all these incumbents, you will the era of government from 2012 will almost be entirely out of office.
Mm-hmm.
As far as the races go, I'm interested to see how much, because so many of these people are new, that the races will sort of just become proxy battles for the 2 parties, and it will be Trump versus not Trump in all of these races. There are people running for city council on gun control platforms, and that seems like a really national issue that will be interesting to see them kind of try to localize.
Yeah, and so that certainly happened in 2018, so maybe gives a roadmap to the fact that it's possible to nationalize a very local race. Oddly, though, we just learned the lesson that actually maybe incumbents can lose, and now it's an irrelevant lesson for 2020. We don't have to worry about it, really.
Right. And then we also have for March the big question about the hotel room tax increase and the convention center expand. Every time I bring that up, people are like, oh, yeah, that. I guess that's going to ramp up at some point. There'll probably be some ads and interest, or
I don't.
You would think.
They just want to finally get it voted on and move on.
I mean, is there going to be a real paid opposition?
Well, that's a big question. So, Michael McConnell, the homeless activist, threatened one. You wonder if some of those activist groups would come out against it. But the coalition they ended up building in support was pretty strong and pretty broad. So we'll see it. All right, Andy and Sara sat down with Councilwoman Vivian Moreno. She is heavily involved in housing and land use issues. In fact, this week when Council President Georgette Gomez brought up the proposed inclusionary housing rules, this would be the requirements builders have to provide either affordable housing on site or pay a fee.
Mm-hmm.
And she proposed a much higher fee, right?
Higher fee,
Yeah.
I think.
And so you talked about it, that process and how that's come about with Vivian Moreno and other issues regarding housing in her district. So check that out.
And we are joined in the great Voice of San Diego podcast studio for the second time, I believe, but the first time as a councilwoman. Councilwoman Vivian Moreno from District 8. Thanks for coming in.
Oh, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so last time we talked, you were in the thick of a campaign, a heated campaign that came right down to the wire. But it's been, 5 months now since you were sworn in? I'm interested. I want to get into a lot of the things you're working on, but one thing I wanted to ask you about is you were a longtime staffer in the District 8 office in City Hall, so you had a lot of relationships with other council offices, with city staff, the mayor's office, etc. And now you're in a very different role. You're the elected official for that district. How do those relationships change, and what's your what's it like being in City Hall? Is it a continuation, or does it feel like a completely different thing?
Well, I mean, it definitely feels like a completely different thing, especially being a staffer. I think the first day that I actually sat down in the dais, there's an immense amount of power that we have at City Council. So, there's no going around that. Now, in regards to relationships, I think they're just fortified, right? Mm-hmm. I still want to continue to have the friendships that I did already establish as a staffer. So it's just a little harder to go out for lunch now. I think that's the only difference. Yeah. And, just being able to call somebody, being able to say, hey, this person is going to respond, right away. That obviously, and just knowing how it works, I think is really important. Knowing the history of a lot of things is also very extremely important. So,
yeah, you probably had a much less steep learning curve than, say, Jen Campbell, in that you had familiarity with who are the key figures down to the mid level and even probably below that management level in city staff, and a history of where these issues had progressed through, when you were in Councilman Alvarez's office for 8 years, right? 8
years, yeah. His whole tenure.
So that probably has to make the learning curve for the job a lot easier.
Yeah, I don't think there was a learning curve. We just hit the ground running, and I think some of the legislation that you'll see that we've passed that we'll probably talk about at LUNH, you could see, we definitely hit the ground running. We're not waiting. We're not, we have a lot of things that we need to address. In San Diego, it's a housing crisis, and we are going to do everything we can to make sure that, that we get to the bottom of it.
Yeah. How do you see in the early days with this council, how do you see the relationship between heavily Democratic council and the mayor's office working? How's that relationship shaping up?
I could speak about the relationship with me and the mayor, and I think that I've always said this. He's the mayor, right? So he obviously still holds a lot of power, and he's a reasonable guy, I think. And some of the things that he's put forward, I have agreed on, and some of the things he's put forward, I haven't. And I think that he has another 19 months left, and I think he wants to make them a successful 19 months. And if that involves giving, putting more attention to District 8, I'm all about it. I've been very clear that District 8, they are 144,000 people are my bosses. I work for them, and so every choice that I make is incumbent upon how is this going to affect District 8. So,
turning San Diego blue, as you say, that this was a really good election for Democrats in San Diego. Council supermajority in place. The supervisor's office, Nathan Fletcher won, and that's already starting to change the way that government operates. Despite the power, the major power shift towards Democrats on the council level, it seems like the start of the year has been kind of slow. It seems like there hasn't been a lot coming through the council level. Feel free to disagree with that, but what do you?
That's not the case in LUNH.
Yeah, okay.
I will let you know, LUNH we hit the ground running.
Okay, so I do want to spend a lot of time on the committee work, but I think for one example, I think maybe the biggest thing that the council has done from a legislative perspective so far this year is maybe the parking requirement reductions.
That came out of LUNH.
And that came out of LUNH, but it also had started like earlier in last year, right? So do you see things changing? Do you see something coming along that's going to require the 6 Democrats to kind of flex their muscle and act alone, essentially?
I don't foresee anything like that. No, not in the next, few months. No, but I think that it's going to take the council, as you mentioned, some of the council members are still, figuring out how the system works, if you will. And I think it's going to take a little bit of time to really establish ourselves.
So one area where you potentially could agree with the mayor a lot is that, the committee you mentioned and his new YIMBY identity. How is the YIMBY agenda progressing, and have you been working with the mayor on anything to advance some of those goals?
Well, I think, and I think that's the interesting part is that the YIMBY, the YIMBY title isn't just a Democrat or Republican title, right? It's about we need more growth, right? It's about the fact that the actions of previous council members, previous mayors, they've put us in a position where we are simply not building at the speed that we need to be building in the city of San Diego. And I mentioned my niece earlier, and it does worry me. I do feel a responsibility to make sure that there is adequate housing for people in her generation, if you will, and she's 16, and that's why at LUNH we've gone full throttle in my committee. In January, I called upon a housing reform. Let's air out anything that needs to be aired out about housing. In February, we did a parking reform. We also did the Balboa Avenue specific plan, which was very contentious. In March, we did the Morena specific plan, and we did the Granny Flat program. That was huge too. And just last week, we passed the middle income density bonus program. And, I think everything should be put on the table, to be honest with you, because we're not building at the capacity that we need to be building in order to accommodate for the residents that are coming. 50% of the population in the southern part of the county is under the age of 18. I mean, that's a huge responsibility for me, right? And I think that one of the ways to make sure that rent doesn't continue to, go as astronomical as it's been headed is to build more.
One of the other big housing policy questions going on at the city right now is the right level of the inclusionary requirement for new developments. And I think it's sort of sorting out whether developers should be required to build on-site affordable homes, and if so, what percentage that should be, whether they should have the option of paying the fee instead, and if that's going to be the case, whether you need to set the fee especially high, whether it's been too low in the past, I guess would be a better way of saying that. Where do you come down on that question on inclusionary? Where should the city's expectation be for private developers building affordable units when they build new projects?
Well, I know that our council president, Georgette Gomez, has taken the reign on that. And I know that I think an item is coming before rules. And I'm curious to see, once again, I'm curious to see the legislation on that.
Should come through LUNH too, right?
She's been working on it for a very long time, and I'm very respectful of that. And so I'm looking forward to reading it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm not gonna have a vote in rules, but I'm looking forward to reading it, and maybe I can come back once that legislation comes out, and we could talk about it.
Well, what from a big picture perspective, what's your thought on if you set it too high, does it discourage development? If you is this the best way to deliver more affordable units by trying to get them into private projects as opposed to paying fees to the housing commission to build their own things? What do you think about that sort of thing?
Well, what I do think about it is I'm very aware that a lot of those fees are gap funding for the San Diego Housing Commission, right? So we have to figure that part out. Now, building affordable on site is always a positive thing. It's always something that anytime I meet with a developer, I tell them, if you build on site, that's what we strive for, right? Because we do not want to create a classist community, right? Where all the affordables in one area and there's no affordables. So absolutely, I'm supportive of affordable on site.
Well, okay, we are basically out of time here, but I want to ask you one question before you go. So mayor's race is starting to heat up. Doesn't seem to be a Republican name in the fold yet. A couple Democrats.
The Shermanator hasn't decided?
Yeah, so is your friend the Shermanator? Is this real? Is there
honestly,
some Shermentum?
He is so cool. He is such a cool guy. He's such. I looked over yesterday at Councilmember Kate, and I said, "Oh, Scott Sherman's rubbing off on me," because we just, we sit next to each
Do you
other.
have a desk countdown going?
No, absolutely not. No, he's a wonderful human being, and I appreciate his insight and his quirkiness at times. But we were talking about the mayoral. Sorry.
Well, yeah. So in the mayor's race, are there any sorts of issues you want to sort of use whatever influence you have in the party to make sure get a full representation in the race? What might those be?
I think for District 8, it's always been about equity, right? And those are topics that that they're bubbling to the surface, right? If you watch the previous PS and LN committee, we talked about programming at parks, right? So I want to make sure that District 8 gets the same amount of funding as any other community. And to add to that, the fact that, we were left behind for so many years, we need to play catch up in District 8, right? So the candidate, and to be honest, council member Barbara Bree, I consider her a friend, and Assembly member Todd Gloria, I consider a friend as well. And I think both of them would be amazing. We would be lucky to have, we're lucky that we're in this place right now in San Diego. And I'm always going to be fighting for District 8 and as I mentioned, we're a very young community just in general. So obviously services for the youth are just very important. And it's different from other communities. And so, I'm always going to be pushing for District 8 and for the Latino-based community, making sure our needs are addressed and that our needs are met as well.
Are you being wooed by both candidates for?
I would say so.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that a Latina from from the southern part of the city is definitely I think it's important. It's important to have, and the fact that I'm a very strong worker. I'm a very committed campaigner. I walk precincts. I raise the money, but most importantly, I truly represent the community that has given me the privilege of being their council member. And I think there's a lot of trust. And so, yes, I think it is important to have me, to have my endorsement, right?
All right. Councilwoman Moreno, thank you for coming into the office.
Thank you for having me. And I hope to be back shortly.
Yes.
Coming up, a sponsored interview by Mingay International Museum. Our producer Nate John went to their new exhibit as it was being set up.
One of our dressing needs
contact
shoulder
me.
pads.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And
So I can always do
is
that.
ambient noise going to be a...
Oh no, that's kind of like why I can't hear. That's Barbara Hanson Forsyth. We're on the top floor of the San Diego Downtown Central Library, and she's setting up a new exhibition for the Mingay Museum there.
Forsyth. I'm the Senior Manager of Collections and Exhibitions at Mingay International Museum, and we are currently at the Central Library Gallery downtown. We have been closed since Labor Day of 2018 for a massive renovation of our building in Balboa Park. So we have been doing some pop-up programming around town, and this is the first full-scale exhibition pop-up we've done, and we are thrilled to work with the library as a partner.
So Mingay is kind of a mobile museum right now, and this is the first chance to experience Mingay in the wild. And part of what distinguishes the museum and Barbara as a curator is the art that they choose. Right now, we're standing in a room that's full of stuff that's not necessarily normal museum art.
Our collecting mission centers around objects of use. So art that is not traditionally always considered art. So things like furniture, ceramics, jewelry, textiles.
And the reason it's all together here, the show she's putting on together in this room that overlooks the city, is it's all craft art that came after World War II. Everything here is mid-20th century.
But there are also some off-the-wall pieces that are not necessarily what one would expect in a mid-century show, and I included them to sort of present this period as really eclectic, really experimental in many ways.
Okay. Oh, wow. That's a fancy looking cape. Tell me about the cape.
So this cape I actually saw before I worked at Mingay International Museum. I remember this cape so vividly myself, and I'm so thrilled to have an opportunity to show it again. The cape is really almost a vessel for the clasp. The clasp feels like mid-century jewelry of the period, but the piece as a whole also has this groovy counterculture element to it. You could almost see it worn at a festival like Burning Man today. It's still so fresh.
But arguably, the centerpiece of all this is the beer can chair. What are we staring at?
So we're looking at one of my favorite pieces in the whole Mingay collection because it's just so wacky. But it is a chair made of brazed Budweiser beer cans. He made it in sort of an X-form chair, which is associated with royalty and goes back to almost to Roman times. So it's got the, it doesn't have a back, but it has the arms, and you can kind of see why it's the X-form chair, because it literally almost forms an X. So it's sort of this, you've got the King of Beers slogan, which I don't think was actually in...
You don't think that was intentional?
I don't think that they had used that tagline yet, King of Beers, but it's just kind of funny now in hindsight, because there's this sense of royalty in that, and power. But yet it's made with these humble cans, and now we're used to cans being unique. So there's the mid-century that's really iconic, that continues to get reproduced and made year after year, and then there's the mid-century that was these one-offs, sometimes forgotten, but when you pull them out and look at them with our 21st century eyes, they seem just as wacky and fresh as they did when they were made.
Mingay, Barbara told me, is a Japanese term. It translates to the art of the people. If you want to see the beer can chair for yourself and all the other pieces in this show, this exhibition, called Crafting Opportunity, is open to the public from May 11th to July 28th at the San Diego Central Library. And you can check out everything that Mingay has going on at mingay.org. There's some other cool stuff they have coming up, like lunchtime lectures about fashion design, and an event where you can make your own art, too. Again, that's at mingay.org. And if you'd like to be featured in a segment like this, or to learn more about Voice of San Diego's podcast production services, write to us at development@voiceofsandiego.org.
All right, thanks for listening to the Voice of San Diego podcast. If you want to know what we're up to every day, subscribe to the newsletters. We've got lots of them. Get those at voiceofsandiego.org/newsletters. I am Scott Lewis, CEO and Editor-in-Chief. Andy Keatts is Assistant Editor. Sara Libby is Managing Editor. And this show was produced by Nate John, Adriana Heldes, and Megan Wood. Actually, that's not true. Nate is, surfing or something? Didn't do anything this week. Get out of here. Didn't need you. It was fine, right? Totally didn't need him. We'll talk to you next week.